Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my Manaforged Arrows spam Deadeye. Manaforged Arrows is a support gem that lets us trigger as many bow skills as we have gem space for. In this case, we have 9 different skills. We reduce the mana cost of our triggered skills with the minus non-channeling mana cost craft on rings. This allows us to use Scourge Arrow then, which is a channeling skill and still costs mana, as a proc for all the other skills, which now cost no mana. This gives us some crazy damage scaling, as well as a ton of individual hits, which means better clear, as well as more instant leech procs and life gain on hit for insane recovery, and it also just kind of looks sick. All our bow skills are synergistic with the reworked Vengeance Cascade Anoint, which makes it so projectiles return back to us for crazy additional clear and damage. We combine this with the tried and true Crystallized Omniscience scaling, converting our attributes into extra elemental penetration and resistances. We then embrace our mapping nature by using Queen of the Forest, which provides us a ton of extra movement speed to make the build feel extra cozy. I made this build because I wanted to play something bow related without using any of the obvious builds like Tornado Shot, Ice Shot, or Lightning Arrow, mainly because I like fiddling around with new mechanics, but also the build is just incredibly fun and a nice alternative for any bow enthusiast who wants to try something new. With that being said, let's get into the build portion of the video. First up, a shout out to Path of Shigur for inspiring this build. When I saw Manaforged Arrows for the first time, I really wanted to try it out and kind of in-depth go into what makes it tick, how the mana cost and stuff works. He definitely helped out a lot with that. He already did that from week 1 or week 2 onwards. The version he made is a lot less mapping oriented and a lot more bossing focused, but I would definitely check out his version as well. The link is down in the description. Now, first up, I want to explain how Manaforged Arrows actually works so you understand the basics. Manaforged Arrows is a trigger support gem that triggers supported bow skills whenever you spend a certain amount of mana. So for example, in this setup right here, I have Ice Shot, Burning Arrow, and Lightning Arrow. And if I remove all the other Manaforged Arrow setups right here, and I just put in this, when I spend a certain amount of mana, it's going to fire all of these skills. Now, Manaforged Arrows has an internal cooldown per skill. So you can't just make a setup, like a 6-link setup with Burning Arrow, Ice Shot, and Lightning Arrow, and then do that again on the next 6-link. You have to actually get different skills, but they all trigger simultaneously, right? So if we have our second setup right here with Galvanic Arrow, Caustic Arrow, and Blast Rain, now we tap, and now it looks like this. And then our last setup down here, Manaforged Arrows with Ensnaring Arrow, Puncture, Frenzy. Why we use those, I'll explain in a second. But basically, then we have this. Now, how does it trigger, though? It says, supported skills trigger once the total mana cost spent on other bow attacks exceeds 300% of mana cost. To give you an example here, that's all that means is the condition is a skill spends 300% of mana cost. So for example, if my Burning Arrow linked to Manaforged Arrows in here, right, should cost 1, if I remember correctly. Let's see it right here. It costs 1 mana. Then that means that with something else that I self-cast, a bow skill, I have to spend 1 times 3 equals free mana, and then it triggers that Burning Arrow. How do I trigger it? That is with Scourge Arrow. So there's a few reasons for that. The first one is I want to keep my mana cost as low as possible so that all these skills always trigger, right? And the only way to really do that is with Scourge Arrow. Now, there's other ways that on paper look better, but in a mapping scenario, I like it a lot more this way. Scourge Arrow is a channeling skill. So you can use stuff with minus to non-channeling skills. So keep all the mana cost down of all the other bow skills while still spending a ton of mana with Scourge Arrow. Most of my skills cost 0 mana while Scourge Arrow still costs 5, making it so I can basically just run around and it's going to proc all of my skills whenever I right click. And just to make this clear, we're using Scourge Arrow only as a trigger. We're not using it for damage. We do have Calling Strike against bosses, which is kind of handy, and faster attacks to make it feel better. And on the point of feel, Scourge Arrow has 190% more attack speed multiplier, right? Usually Scourge Arrow can be clunky if you want to charge it up, right? Like for example, let's see the pots up here. If I had to charge it up every time, mapping would look like this, right? But the thing is, you don't. You only want it as a mana spender, right? And it doesn't spend mana whenever it hits a stack. It just spends mana when you right-click, right? As you see up here, I'm not even producing any pods. I'm just right-clicking. And that just produces an incredibly feeling build overall. Now, in terms of mana cost reduction, we have 2 times -7 mana of non-channeling skills. Now, I have a Kalanos Touch here, but let's just put this in here for better visibility. -7 times 2. I know you can get to -8, but we want exactly -7. On top of that, we have exactly 26% reduced mana cost for attacks from the helmet right here. That's the Searing Exarch implicit. And then there's also inspiration in both 6 links. A little bit of a warning here. Sometimes BOB is like off by 1 mana or something. So just trust what's in the POB that I have there. It's going to be like that in game. Sometimes it rounds down and then the game rounds up. It's very confusing to me. I had to recraft this helmet 2 times. It wastes like 5 divines. But yeah, you want inspiration in both 6 links. You do not want divergent inspiration. That is too much reduced mana cost, either a normal one or anomalous. To make this a little bit easier, you can just fiddle around with it however you want. There is only 3 rules. Burning Arrow has to cost exactly 1 mana. And that is so that you actually have something to expend that gives you inspiration charges, right? We're supporting both of these. We want to get the extra damage. Burning Arrow costs 1 mana more or 2 mana more than the other bow skills, so it's going to always be the most expensive one. So if you look in game and it says that Burning Arrow costs 1, you're safe. The second rule is no triggered skill can exceed 1 mana. Once again, you can check this. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why I don't have a support in here. I have 3 different skills, is because my Ensnaring Arrow already costs 1 mana. You can try support it with like Culling Strike or something, or put the Power Judge on crit here, right? You can play around with this. Just make sure that none of your skills costs more than 1. And then make sure that your Scourge Arrow costs at least 4 mana. That should be pretty easy. 5 mana, right? Just don't put like Inspiration on it or something, I guess. Or don't put too much reduced mana cost of attacks here. Yeah, pretty easy. Our goal is basically just Burning Arrow costs 1. All other triggered skills cost 1 or less. And then you'll basically get this. And then let's talk about our skills triggered and also a little bit about the POB, how you get to these numbers. Most important thing you have to know about the skills that we're using on this build is that they kind of revolve around Venging Cascade. Not exactly all of them, but most of them. What Venging Cascade does is it lets skills return back to you, so basically hit enemies that it pierces through twice. Which is, by the way, also the reason we're not using Chain. Chain is better on paper, but the thing is, if you chain to an enemy and it's like a single target, there's no enemies nearby, it just comes back and only hits once. So what you actually want is you want Pierce. And you might think that's a problem, but the big thing about this is Manaforged Arrows auto targets. So that means that usually what Chain does is it clears all the mobs that aren't exactly where your arrow is, right? But that's not really a problem when you have a homing skill. Now you can also try out like a setup with 1 pierce and the chain and maybe cut like some single target damage. If you really want to play around with that, could be helpful if you're clearing legions or something. I personally haven't seen any problems with clear. If you're asking why I'm not using a certain skill, the most likely answer is that it doesn't work with Venging Cascade. For example, Tornado Shot is the best example. Tornado Shot doesn't really work with Venging Cascade because what happens is this, right? It doesn't proc where it's supposed to. It procs behind you, right? So obviously, if you would aim on the edge of the screen, it would kind of go there and it would just disappear, right? Or it just depends on where you aim, and you don't want to have that. It's just so awkward, and we don't have the Helm enchant anyways. We don't have that many additional arrows. So Tornado Shot just doesn't make any sense. The first and by far best skill that you can proc is Burning Arrow. Burning Arrow is insane, and that's because it has so much base damage and so much added flat damage. The only downside usually is that you have 70% base attack speed, making it kinda clunky to play and not that good, right, for DPS. But the thing is, these skills are triggered, so all these less attack speed multipliers don't apply. And it works with Venging Cascade. Same with Ice Shot and Lightning Arrow. Both work with Venging Cascade and are extremely strong in terms of clear. I don't think I have to say much about these. These are basically meta skills already. So that is going to form our first 6 link, which has some damage support. So if you look in POB, you can see that if I cut it, that's like half our damage gone right there. And the reason I have count here at Burning Arrow once again is because that's Venging Cascade. It hits once when it comes out, once when it comes back. Same with Ice Shot, same with Lightning Arrow. Then in our second setup, we have Galvanic Arrow, Caustic Arrow, Blast Rain. And this is where it gets a little bit more muddy, and I'm sure people could do a little bit more testing and figure something better out. But this is at least my reasoning. So first up, Galvanic Arrow is just a decent skill, right? It's nothing to write home about. All you have to know is the AoE up front does not work with Venging Cascade. It doesn't like come back or something, but the arrow does if you actually hit an enemy. Now, I'm not 100% sure if the arrow actually hits twice. I haven't really gotten any info on that, but the reason I put 3 here is because I think it does. So the Galvanic Arrow would do 2 times the damage with the projectile, but only 1 time the damage with the AoE. Then we have two skills that actually don't really work with Vengeance Cascade, but are still nice to have in the build. The first one is Caustic Arrow. Caustic Arrow is a little bit weird. You might be wondering why I use this, because it doesn't work with Vengeance Cascade, so it doesn't sound that good, right? But the thing is, it doesn't double hit on single targets anymore, but it still hits pretty broad in terms of AoE, and then goes back, right? So stuff behind you still dies while it still deals damage on top, and it auto targets, meaning that all your other skills are arrows, but this is kind of an AoE that covers like the in-between. Overall, I've been really happy with Caustic Arrow so far. And then the third one is Blast Rain. Blast Rain is just too good not to use. It's just a really good single target damage. It scales with all our additional arrows. In total, we get 10 times 35.9, so 359 base damage. Even though it doesn't work with Vengeance Cascade, it's pretty awesome. Another big reason to use it is the Anomalous gives you a chance to cover enemies in Ash, and like 40% of our damage is fire. And then our last setup, Frenzy, is pretty obvious. Gives us Frenzy charges, works with Vengeance Cascade. Kind of like, yeah, it just bounces around. It's a normal projectile, basically. Now, the other two skills are a little bit ghetto, I will say that. The second one is Ensnaring Arrow. This one actually apparently does not work right now, or it's because of Pierce. I'm not sure. I haven't really figured it out. Maybe somebody in the comments can enlighten me. Maybe it's just bugged with Manaforged Arrows, but you do not get the Ensnaring debuff. So don't go here and do Ensnaring stacks. It will just inflate the DPS. It doesn't actually work. The reason we use it is it has pretty high base damage. It's 175%. That's kind of almost like Ice Shot. And then the last skill is Puncture, which is basically from its thing here, the same as Burning Arrow. The 70% base does not apply, right? So it doesn't make the skill worse, at least, but it only has half the damage of Burning Arrow. That's also why we didn't put it into supports. It still has decent damage, right? Like all of these, if you look at this setup, for example, if we would exclude it, that's actually quite a bit of damage, right? That's almost a fourth of our damage for just sacrificing another 4-link. In terms of POB for these two secondary setups, right? The second 6-link here, which has Power Charge on crit, which basically affects all of it. In terms of POB right here, we have Blast Rain, which is already calculated, so you can leave the count at 1. Galvanic Arrow, like I already said, I have it at 3. But it might just be 2, I'm not sure. And Caustic Arrow 5. This is not 10, I know, because it does not work with Vengeance Cascade. It's 5 because we have 4 additional arrows and the initial arrow. Now, another reason why we're using another Manaforged setup here, other than the 6 links, which are, the 6 links are kind of obvious, right? But the 4 link is a little bit weird, is Instant Leech. So the way this works is the more arrows I have, the more I leech instantly. Why is that? Because there is a cap of how much one projectile can leech, and that is 10%, right? And then if we take 10% of that 10%, which is the instant leech that we get from just this node right here, then basically what this is per projectile, we get 1% of life gain on hit. The other leech doesn't go away, but that is just the instant leech, right? So that means that the more arrows we have, the more we're going to leech instant. And one thing I can tell you is on this build, recovery is pretty crazy. Now then let's talk about cooldown recovery rate. Manaforged Arrows has a built-in cooldown time of 0.5 seconds, so you can't just infinitely spam it. We can manipulate this with cooldown recovery rate, and there's a few breakpoints because of how server tick rate works. It's very similar to how, for example, a cast on crit build would operate. I just made this config real quick. Don't get confused by the 0.528. It's basically 0.5. Now, our first breakpoint will be 38%, which is on very budget gear. I wouldn't recommend this. The build is going to feel a little bit more awkward. I would definitely recommend one of these two right here. But if you can only get 38%, then you will be at 0.36 free. Why do I say breakpoints? It's because if I type in 41% here, and let's say we get an extra 3%, nothing changes, right? But if we go from 38 to 37, you can see it goes down. The next actual increase happens at 52%, where it goes down to 0.330, which is still reachable. And then the hardest one to reach will be the 69% CDR. At 69, you will actually go down to 0.297. Now, how do we get to that 69% breakpoint? Here are the sources, right? First up, we have a new Crucible passive that basically gives you reduced skill effect duration, which doesn't matter, but 25% increased cooldown recovery rate. This one is incredibly vital. Secondary, the 20% from boots. You can get these from Maven. The normal tiers go from 10 to 15. With Maven, you can get 16 to 20. The third one is from Belt. This is only a craft. You can also get a veiled one with 16%. If you get that, you don't have to run, for example, the Abyss Jewel, or you don't have to get the perfect roll on the boots. But yeah, just make sure you have a suffix open on your belt. And then the last one, I have the 2% from Abyss Jewel. Obviously, if I would have a better belt, I would do it here, but it's very awkward to craft on an Omni belt. The Abyss Jewel that I have, for example, is one where I just get Corrupted Blood as well, right? I get the 2%. You can also get 3%, but as I said, it doesn't make any difference. However, if you get 3%, then, for example, you can get away with 19% on the boots, making it so you don't have to spam Divine Orbs. Now, quickly here about attack speed rate. You actually don't want to have too much attack speed, and that is for a simple reason. With all this cooldown recovery, we have the 69% CDR, which is 0.297 cooldown, right? But now if we attack too fast, what happens is, let's say we attack for the first time, right? The cooldown goes off. The second attack now happens before the cooldown is even up, right? But then the third attack won't be up exactly when the cooldown is up. It will be delayed, right? So having too much attack speed is just as bad as having too little. However, that only really matters for bossing. And for me personally, I didn't really care all that much. What I will say though is that is the reason, for example, you won't see an attack speed roll on my bow. Attack speed doesn't scale cooldown. It's just basically there to make the build feel better, right? That is basically it. You can even go for a Harbinger bow for even more crit. It will probably be a lot cheaper than a spine bow. But while mapping, it's completely irrelevant. And on the Deadeye version, right, what happens as well is you have Gathering Winds, and you're not always on full stacks. You have Onslaught on kill, right? So it's not always up against bosses. So it's just not that consistent, but you won't really feel really a distance. I'm just saying this in case you want to do like a different version that kills like uber bosses or whatever, but that is not what this build is made for. Now let's talk about Ascendancy. I use Deadeye because it's just the best bow Ascendancy in terms of mappers. There's a lot of versions out there, right? Saboteur, the tri-attribute stacker, right? But if you want to have something mapping wise, I think this is a really good choice in terms of clear speed and movement speed. First up, Endless Munitions just gives you a ton of projectiles. Since we're really socket starved, we can't just put GMP everywhere, right? So getting something global is just incredible. We also get +1 additional arrow from our quiver, and then also +1 from multi-shot. We're not taking the last one here. Then we have Far Shot, which isn't really used for the barrage stuff. If you don't know, you can't trigger barrage stuff, unfortunately. Far Shot is basically super strong with Venging Cascade because outgoing projectiles that come back get the full buff, the full 60% more damage. However, the projectiles that go out, if you're not far enough away, which you can't really be because of auto-targeting, is not going to apply. So for estimation, I would say it's around about 30 to 40%. I just went for 30% more damage here. That is what I would say. So don't put it in projectile travel distance here. Just use this right here. Like I said, just an estimation. Then we have the Gathering Winds. Gives us Tailwind, which is huge. Obviously, supercharged Tailwind, but it also means that on boots, we can get cooldown recovery rate without getting no Tailwind at all, while still getting Elusive and Onslaught, right? And then at the end here, we have Focal Point, which gives us increased effect of our marks. This is around about 20% more damage or so against single targets, which is quite nice. You can also play around with Ricochet, but as I explained already, it doesn't work well with Venging Cascade because you actually need to pierce through the enemy. And once you take a bit of pierce, chain gets a lot worse. All right, then a quick showcase of the build. We just have a city square right here. I'm going to show you what this build does. We're currently farming metamorphs kind of in city square. I'm going to show this more off. We have a sextant that gives them 100% more life. And then we also have the passive tree here with 150% more life, which are multiplicative. So what you're going to see in a second is metamorphs with 500% more life. I just want to point that out in case you guys are like, oh, he's not even doing any boss in the showcase. Yeah, these things have insane amount of life and more life than most bosses will ever have. But so I don't know what to tell you. It's super easy, right? I have focus here on my left click. I have blink arrow and I just tap scourge arrow here from time to time. I'm going to put on my auras, right? Which is grace and anger. I think everything should be set up properly. Yep. Okay. That's it. Let's go. That is literally it. That's all you have to do. It is a bow blaster. It's made to be comfy. It's made to be fun, right? You go to the bosses first, kill the bosses. Whoops. You do the deli, right? And you have a lot of sustain here through region. You pop through. Let's do some red altars right here. And yeah, I guess we can talk about something, but that is about all we do, right? That is the normal bow zoomer playstyle. Something I love about this build, like I said, is it has a lot of movement speed. It's very fun to play. Now, obviously, your mileage in terms of single target and defenses will always vary with these builds. With currency, don't let yourself get told anybody else, right? I always see these like budget bow builds. This is definitely the league to do a budget bow build. I will say that, but you still need some investment, right? Once you get Omni, you start to pop off, but then you also need some of the other pieces. So I think we cleared everything we wanted right here. Let's release the deli, and let's do a metamorph real quick. All you have to know against single target is basically that you want to stay away a little bit, right? You obviously want to pop your focus if you have focus at the right time. As you can see right here, you don't want to be too far away, but this is kind of where you want to be. So yeah, the single target damage on this version is incredible. Once again, it will vary depending on your investment. Let's do another one real quickly. What does this have? It has a ghost. All right, let's do this again. I'm going to walk a little bit back, but not too far back so it can still auto-target. As you can see here, my cursor doesn't really matter. It's really only about me being near it because Manaforged Arrows auto-targets. So then let's talk about items. First up, my bow. Now, you can use a spine bow. You can use a harbinger bow, like the slower bows. It's not that big of a deal. You don't really need that much attack speed. Attack speed is more of a feel-good stat. As long as you have enough attack speed to proc your Manaforged Arrows regularly, that is fine because we have a cooldown, right? And so, yeah, it's not that important. Now, first up, the Crucible tree. As much flat damage as you can get, then as much crit as you can get. If you have a slower base, you can also get attack speed here, but do not under any circumstances get the attack speed that gives you less global damage. It's absolutely atrocious on this build. This is the most important node of all, the cooldown recovery rate. It's going to make the build feel 100 times better. And then also the increased explicit elemental damage modifiers. So in terms of importance, number 1, number 2, I would say number 3, and then number 4. If you want to know how to craft this bow, it wouldn't really fit in this video. Maybe one of the crafter wants to do a videos, or maybe already has. Check out that. Basically just your standard tri-LE damage bow, but it doesn't have attack speed and a suffix. Otherwise, it's just the same as all the tornado shot and lightning arrow and ice shot people have. In terms of quiver, we have, you would just want life, additional arrow, multi, projectile speed, as much increased damage as you can get. Attack speed is not that important. I have a feathered arrow quiver. The reason we have so much projectile speed is it feels good, but also we have the bow mastery here for the increases and reductions to projectile speed also applies to damage with bows. And we have Queen of the Forest. If you want to be tankier, you can go for stuff like Lightning Coil. Definitely going to be solid. But since we're more of a mapping focused build, this is going to be it. We're, I think, at around about 43,000 evasion right now. 45,000 is what you want to reach with this chest. That's where you get the cap, right? Everything over it will not provide you any movement speed, but 45,000, if you can reach it, is really, really strong. If you can get a good implicits, that's nice. Plus 2 additional gems, I don't think does that much, so whatever you want. I think increased damage is the best. In terms of boots, you want to get CDR, attack speed with Onslaught, and then also movement speed. Sushi actually has a crafting guide on this on Maxshow. I'll link it down in the description. As for our ring, we made this one with Vivid Vultures, which is the beast that rerolls synthesis implicits. We basically spammed Scorn Essences until we hit a combination of attributes. In this case, we have a tier 2 and a tier 1, so not perfect, but whatever. Since I didn't want to craft a second one and I had a Calandra's Touch, I just used the Calandra's Touch. It's basically, yeah, just copies your other ring. Something you can definitely experiment, by the way, is going 2 unset rings, then putting your auras into those unset rings, and then going for another Manaforged setup just on the side. It's also going to be a lot cheaper than some of these synthesis implicits. Crystallized Omniscience is our huge damage dealer. All your attributes get converted into Omniscience, which then basically means that you get a ton of penetration and elemental resistances. So that's why you'll see us have so many attributes on our gear. Now, then we have our belt, which only important thing here is cooldown recovery rate. You definitely want a high amount of increased dexterity, intelligence, or strength, doesn't matter. And if you can get other synthesis implicits as well. This one we crafted, I think, with, just some attribute essence until you get a second one, get a little bit of life on it, and then the cooldown recovery and the suffix, and you're done. In terms of helmet and gloves, now, this build is really accuracy starved, as with most Omni builds. Since your dexterity gets converted, you don't have that much, so I just bought these bases, basically, just fracture it. You can also buy other bases, for example. If it already has the int fractured or the chaos rest fractured, then you just roll for the accuracy normally, right? But you definitely want accuracy from these things. Otherwise, you're going to miss a lot. What you want to focus here is, like I said, the 26% reduced mana cost of attacks is really important. But then also in terms of defense, getting a lot of physical taken as fire or cold, right, in the implicit is really important. getting more attributes, getting a little bit of chaos res so you don't die to degens or physical as chaos. Also make sure that you have good bases. For example, the lion pelt here and the slink gloves here will provide you with a lot of evasion. On the gloves, it's basically just a carbon copy of this. In the implicits, we have suppress and also extinguish. As you can see, we're actually not ailment immune, but we do have extinguish, which means enemies that got hit once by extinguish cannot apply anymore. So that helps a lot against stuff like shock or ignite, but you still want to be freeze immune from something like the Pantheon over here. As for jewels, we have 3. You want either a lethal pride or a brutal restraint. In this position here, there's a lot of notables where you can get cool effects, like for example, percentage strength, physical taken as, stuff like that. More on that in the passive tree section. We have a Watcher's Eye. Now, we're running only 2 auras, which is Anger and Grace. By the way, as your helm enchant, you should have either Grace or Anger mana reservation efficiency. Both basically just solve the issues. Otherwise, you can't reserve both, which is a problem. And you don't want a path to Charisma. It's way too much investment. Crit multi, while affected by Anger, is huge. Extra movement speed is huge. There's other mods as well that are comparable. And then the last jewel is important if you want to reach your last cooldown breakpoint. You want to have at least 2%, maybe 3%. And then some life, attack speed, crit multi, whatever. But I would really look forward to get Corrupted Blood on here. Otherwise, you're going to actually just die all the time. Corrupted Blood immune, just a no-brainer. As for Flask, we have a Diamond with even more crit chance. And we have them all automated, basically. A Quicksilver with movement speed, what a surprise. Jade Flask with extra evasion, what a surprise. Taste of Hate is basically there for a little bit of extra protection against physical one-shots, which is really important. And then we have Progenesis, which is, I think, really expensive right now. It's around about 23, 24 divines, but it will help a ton. If you can't get a Progenesis, definitely get an Amethyst Flask, though. While we do take Progenesis for its unique effect, obviously, getting some Chaos Res is also really, really valuable. Now, the gem setup is really important, so definitely watch out for that. This build is very gem-starved as well, so it's definitely important to use your gems wisely. Scourge Arrow procs all our Manaforged setups. It's supported with faster attacks to make it feel better. We have Calling Strike to give extra single target damage without taking away from any of our gem setups. And then we also have Blink Arrow in here because it also gets affected by faster attacks, and it's our movement skill. Then our first Manaforged setup will be with Lightning Arrow, Ice Shot, Burning Arrow. Now, these are just different qualities. Anomalous gives extra crit chance, extra AoE. You can check those out, whatever you want. You should usually follow what kind of quality I have if you can. Anomalous Inspiration, the only important thing here is that you don't go Divergent. You don't need the extra reduced mana, right? And then at the end, we have Awakened LE damage just for a little bit extra damage. This is literally half of our damage. And our secondary damage comes up from our second setup, which is Blast Rain. As I said, get Anomalous for the Covered in Ash. It's really good. Caustic Arrow, just normal. Divergent Galvanic Arrow. This just makes it so it's a little bit more forward, which is nicer with Far Shot, I guess. And then we have our 2 supports. Once again, only Anomalous Inspiration. Don't go further. And Power Charge on crit. Get Power Charges, affects the damage of all our setups. And our third setup is Manaforged Arrows with Frenzy, Puncture, and Snaring Arrow. All I want to say here is Phantasmal Puncture actually makes it so enemies get maimed, which is a nice side effect. And then we have 4 sockets left to work with. 2 of them are our Auras, Grace, and Anger. Extra damage, extra defense. You can definitely play around with Anger if you want to go Purity. Sure, but our resistances are mostly covered. And then you have Mark on Hit with Sniper's Mark for extra single target damage. And obviously, we go Sniper's Mark also because of Focal Point. Now, our passive tree is a pretty standard Omni tree. There's a few other things. First, I want to talk about the Timeless Jewel right here, though. This can be either a Brutal Restraint or a Lethal Pride. Now, people are hyper-focusing on Brutal Restraints. The good ones are insanely valuable right now, but one thing I want to talk about is Lethal Pride. There's some really good mods on here as well, and it's basically almost as good, and you can just buy way better ones for cheaper. And what you can get as well is 5% of fizz damage taken from hits as fire, which stacks on top of everything else. You can basically get to 100% if you want to do something like a lightning coil. So yeah, just go for like double damage, increased strength, fizz taken as fire, right? Stuff like that. I don't know. Oh yeah, Intimidate is also incredibly strong if you can get 1 Intimidate on there. That is very good. Or also flat strength. However, if you have 50 to 100 divines to spend, Brutal Restraint is also incredibly good. And maybe you get some deals. It doesn't really matter, right? Like, the only change is really that you get +2 strength or +2 dex. Now, Then what we pick is Pierce, once again, because of Vengeance Cascade. It's very important. Don't forget the instant leech right here. We're taking a lot of evasion-based stuff because of our Queen of the Forest. It gives us increased movement speed per evasion rating, which means we take stuff like Fleetfoot and also freedom of movement, which gives us evasion while phasing, and we have phasing on kill. Also, the movement speed if you haven't taken damage recently. If you're wondering why on kill is ticked in PoB, it's because there's a mapper, once again. Very important, we're super accuracy starved, once again. So we take Acuity right here. Now, this point right here with the 500 accuracy minus 2 accuracy per level, I put into the PoB, but I don't have it in game, and that's only because that is against like bosses and stuff like that, and I'm only mapping. So for me, I actually don't need that. As you can see right here, if I go to my Scourge Arrow, I already have 100% chance to hit. So definitely check that in PoB, depending on what content you're doing. Other than that, definitely don't forget the increase and reductions to proj speed applies to bows. You might be wondering why I don't take this. The simple reason is it's actually not worth it, and I am already capped without it, right? And it's actually less damage than, for example, long shot because of the way our projectiles travel. But you can definitely take that, for example, if you don't have this large cluster right here. Let's talk about this large cluster. This one's really hard to make, but all you need to know is you want increased effect, 25 or 35%. Is actually not that big of a deal on here. You don't have any breakpoints. Both are really strong, and then as much dexterity, intelligence, or strength as you can. You can also juggle some chaos res or all res in there. Would also be pretty damn strong. But it's also about the max life, right? All of these points give me around about 3% more damage, which is about on par as all the other points, but it also gives me that plus 12 life per point, right, with the increased effect. And that can get pretty big with all of these points combined. However, if you can't afford a good jewel, definitely go for stuff like Utmost Swiftness or Primeval Force or whatever gives you extra damage. You can also path up here, get the extra jewel socket for something, maybe fix some of your res or whatever, maybe crit multi, and then also get the +1 to power charge, because we basically get it for free. You can also take these for the strength or int nodes. But the main problem if you don't have a cluster is the amount of jewel sockets you're gonna have. And then a little section here at the end. What is this build actually for? It's for fast mapping. A lot of the decisions we make are for movement speed. For example, the Queen of the Forest here, we're sacrificing quite a bit, right? This could be a rare chest with a ton of damage, a ton of stats, or even a lightning coil to make us a lot tankier, but we just don't need it, right? Fleetfoot as well. Freedom of movement. If you would remove all of these points, you could get a ton of extra stats. Your PoB could look so much better, but that is what I choose to do with the build. Now, so anything that needs a fast mapper, right? Boss rushing, out can go. Anything where you can leverage doing a ton of maps per hour instead of doing a few juiced ones, or other stuff that can leverage a lot of movement speed, for example, heist. And then with investment, your single target will go up, and that's mostly because this league you can make some crazy bows if you have the currency to back it up, but also because Manaforged Arrows is just really, really strong. As you can see right here, pretty damn good single target damage. If you want to do uber bosses, I wouldn't really recommend it. I don't really see why you would do it with this build because we have so much movement speed. But if you want to, with enough investment, you could. But yeah, you're going to be probably too squishy. So what's the conclusion on the build? It was incredibly fun. I wanted to play bow characters patch because of how they changed Vengeance Cascade, but I didn't want to go for a normal Tornado Shot, Lightning Arrow, or Ice Shot. I wanted to challenge myself at least a little bit because there's already so many good versions out there. I didn't really think I could really improve upon those. And Manaforged Arrows just seemed like so much fun. As well as that, I will say this. I think this is not the way GGG intended this build to be played. I'm just going to say carefully here. I don't know if this is going to be around next league. I don't want to FOMO anybody. But honestly, if you're ever going to play a spammy bow build that kind of looks like a cost on crit build, it's probably going to be this league. Now, this build definitely needs some gear to get going, though, which isn't really much different to Tornado Shot, Lightning Arrow, Ice Shot. I still want to say it. I'm not really sure. I haven't really league started with this build, so I don't know where like the breakpoints would be. You can kind of test it out. There's also other content creators who have more budget versions. For example, Goratha has a budget version that I saw, like a Sabo version, which is more hardcore oriented. And then, as I said in the intro, Path of Sugar. So yeah, we got to level 99 with it. We're currently farming some Metamorphs, which is really fun. Doing some boss rushing. More on that in a day or two, if it is not already. And yeah, hope you learned a little bit. Maybe you got inspired. Maybe you can figure out a better version of this. Or maybe you just want to replicate it. But since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.